if you mismatch your types? The answer is absolutely. It will not always tell you if you make a mistake if it still compiles, but that's beside the point. So in this case, you are getting type checking by the compiler. And it is type checking and verifying that, yes, directory name is the same as directory name camel case. Yes, at the back.
I think this could be used just like anything else. I mean, to the comment on maintainability. I mean, in this case, it's probably good because they're all closely related. But I don't think you just start putting 50 variables. The assignments in the same way.
Could you go ahead and write confusing code with tuples? The answer is yes, just like pretty much any other feature you're using in C#. You know, I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, if you manage a group of lots of junior people, it has to be simple.
So I guess someone would argue there is stuff you can do in C# that is no longer simple, right? And there's a significant amount of it. And do we want to prevent the complex in favor of always programming to the lowest common denominator? In this case, I'm referring to people. And I would suggest probably not, right? And probably not. That's not the case. But could you go ahead and define it? I guess at the end of the day, I'm going to say this. I find this very appealing. I find it very useful, and there's a bunch of people coming from other languages that really see this as powerful. And I would suggest that based on that, it's an optional feature that you can choose to use, and I'll say the same thing as I did before. If you don't like it, don't use it. If you want to make coding standards that prevent it, that's fine. I think you'll find it useful enough that you'll start to use this way more often than you realize. At least that's my experience with programming. Yes?
Here is something like this in Scala.
Yeah. So the comment is there's something like this in language X and language Y and language Z, and the answer is absolutely. So many people who argue it's about time C#.
Meetup is an icon.
Yes. Well, and we haven't even shown that yet, so hold that thought. Yes.
What is order of assignment?
What at the back?
Order of assignment.
The order starts with directory name being assigned first. Good question. Okay, you had a comment.
Oh, I would just say that, you know, based on when I've played with this and other languages that I've used, I tend to, as a kind of heuristic for whether it makes sense to have a tuple or have a name class, like whether I can come up with a good name for the class, because sometimes I end up having classes, before tuples, end up having classes that are just called something with something, or something resolved.
So hold that thought, because I don't think we haven't talked about using tuples in that sense. This is very much just variables. I'm literally assigning multiple variables. I'm using tuple syntax, but I don't actually need a tuple per se right now. So hold that thought. One thing to note is you can't override and return. So just because I've got a return here where I'm assigning 3 variables, my tuple has 3 variables, I can't have another tuple that just has 2. Right? Because return, we're still true to the way C# was since 1.0, where you cannot override a method by changing just the return type. And so I've got that. Okay, next. In this particular case, you'll notice I'm now declaring the variable. I'm no longer using my class properties, directory name, file name, and extension. I'm now actually declaring the variable as I do the assignment. So I'm returning from split path, which is returning a tuple, okay, per se, and I'm now assigning it to a tuple as well. And in this case, I'm declaring 3 variables. And the data type, as this gentleman was concerned about, the data type is determined by anonymous typing with var. So I'm actually declaring the variables in this case. And then I'm going to go ahead and test them, and of course they're going to go ahead and work. You'll notice, in addition, that I can actually now use the tuple as a type parameter in my call to R equal. So here I'm using the type parameter. I'm checking, hey, is this a string? Is this a tuple with 3 string items? And then I'm going to go ahead and compare all 3 at the same time. And the tuple itself does go ahead and verify the constituent parts, so it overrides the equality operator inside the implementation of the tuple.
Does R equal behave in parallel, or does it still do it sequentially?
It does it sequentially. Good question. And in this case, I can't see how you would not do that. Right? There's nothing here that would allow that to happen. Well, at least not in an efficient manner. I think in that case, if you try to do it sequentially, it'd be more expensive than just doing the comparison. Yes, question over here.
If you remove type that tuple from I equal, will it infer that type automatically? Or-
Yes. So the question was, if I go ahead and remove this type, will the type get inferred automatically? And the answer is absolutely.
That you assign it.
Sorry, can I just mention a pet peeve about that specific question? Not because you asked that question. R equal is kind of weird. It turns out that if you look at the signature for R equal, you'll notice it takes an object. And that means I could compare two different types, like an int and a string, and it would compile. So I actually have a coding standard when I go ahead and program with MS Test, and that is to always use the type parameter when calling R equal, so I'll always get a compiled error if I happen to be comparing two different types that are not the same. So my coding standard, in spite of the fact what ReSharper does, my coding standard is if you were using R equal, you should always explicitly put the type in. In fact, I would argue that that ReSharper needs to be corrected to say that if the method is overloaded to take an object, it should not allow you, it should not suggest to you that you should get rid of the type parameter. Because it's actually a bad thing, because the compiler will say, yeah, everything's fine, even though you're comparing a string with an int, which doesn't pass. Yes?
What if when you have those strings that by directory?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, please?
What if when you're asserting and you passing, what if one of those three parameters you passing as an empty string or null? Would it track?
If they are not the same, absolutely it would catch it. Now, are you saying in the data type of the tuple?
Yeah, in the data type you pass it where that's the name or finding the empty string or null.
So-
Would it cause the system to track?
So, if I understand your question, my response is, if you're using null, the rules are the same. If the type can be determined, then it's going to allow that the compiler will go ahead and check it. If the type cannot, it won't. In this case, I needed to use a generic type, and if I had used null, it would have said, hey, I don't know what you're trying to compare. Right? So there is no changes to the language in terms of type compatibility and type interpolation type interpolation. There's no changes in that sense at all. There's something really interesting about this code. Can anyone see what that is? I'm looking specifically at line 76.
Yeah, you're calling named. So normalized path return, if I remember correctly, split path returns the tuple, and yet you're using named fields were basically in the tuple.
How on earth does normalized path have a name like have a property called directory name or a field called directory name? How does it have file name and how does it have an extension? Where is it getting that information from? And how is the compiler allowing it to be
It's an extension method, right?
The
Yes.
only way I can see it is the tuple returns two values. One of them may be directory name, and when you say dot directory name, you're saying choose this one.
But normalized path is declared as a var.
And split path doesn't return anything that's named.
And-
It returns string, string.
Well, not quite.
It's a var, that means
Oh,
it's
you
strong.
changed it.
No, I didn't change it. I didn't make any changes.
Oh, you put the names in.
You'll notice that when I return the tuple from split path, I provide names. So not only am I returning a tuple, which is the syntax here, in addition I'm saying, hey, in this tuple, I want you to return string, 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 and I want you to use these as the names of the items that are part of that tuple.
It's like you return an anonymous class with those properties.
That is exactly right. I am now returning an anonymous type not literally, but seemingly an anonymous type, and I'm actually giving the properties names. And I'll say this now, I was going to save it later, but it turns out that with this syntax, we essentially are deprecating an anonymous type, which one of you over there said, hey, this is the cool feature. In fact, I think it was you. This is the cool feature of C# 3.0. And it turns out, if the C# team had had tuples in C# 3.0, they would not have created anonymous types.
So when you do LinkedIn, like doing a select or whatever, do you use tuples now?
So the question is, so now when I use link over an Oracle table that has 300 fields, and I want to just get back 5, hypothetically it's Oracle, I just want to get back 5, would I use an anonymous type or would I use a tuple? And I'm going to suggest you would use a tuple.
Because the problem we've had in the past is that we couldn't break our queries into like public functions.
Yeah.
Because you can't return an anonymous type.
Right, so the feature being specifically, and I'll get to you in a second, the feature specifically here is with anonymous types, they cannot be accessed outside of the function in which they're declared. Now, there's corner cases, but let's just ignore those for practicality. Now we're saying not only can we declare that tuple within the method, but the return outside the method is accessible. And furthermore, it actually has the names. And you no longer have to refer them to item 1, item 2, and item 3. Give me 1 second over here.
So I just want to argue this from a different perspective. That is all great at compile time, but it's gone at runtime.
No,
The symbols are gone. You cannot get the name of that tuple name.
That's not correct.
At least not easily.
that's not correct. Let's hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll come back to
You
it.
solved the problem for everybody. You can explain.
An example I've seen is color. When you're reading from a database and you want to read the entire row, I think you read it either as a string or a tuple, and then you separate each column.
I'm not following.
You can use the tuple to read from a database an entire row, and each column is an element of the tuple.
That's correct. So essentially what I'm saying is, when you go to query from the database and you want to filter vertically to only get a few columns, you can go and use a tuple and get back a data type that has names for each of the fields and their first-class citizens. And furthermore, just to be clear, the compiler will check that when you use the name, it exists. In fact, when I use IntelliSense here, not here, down here, you will notice that the name, stink. Stink. Okay, trust me.
Move your mouse off. I think it's because your mouse is on it.
No.
Move your mouse over it.
Trust.
Stink. Okay, trust me. For those people in the front, do you guys verify that it said directly?
I see something interesting though, so yes, IntelliSense shows that. IntelliSense does not show.
Yes. Hold on. Okay. Other comments? Any other questions? Yes, over here.
If you use like a serialization library like service stack text or Microsoft and try to serialize that normalized book to JSON or something.
Yes. Okay. So the question that is burning in your guys' heart is, where the heck is that naming coming from? How does it work? Blah, 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 blah. Hold on, I'm going to get there, but I got to do a couple other things first, so please be patient.
Can I throw one more argument on it?
Argument? As in why this is a bad thing? We should
Versus anonymous.
Yes.
But you may be talking about something.
Yes.
There's a limit. Value tuple only goes up to 7, 8
Nope.
with T-rest or something. So,
Nope.
okay, so can you also cover that?
Yeah.
This is going to be the change that makes sense.
Okay, so to start, let's be clear. I am using a tuple, okay? And this is a value tuple, not system.tuple. This is system.value tuple, which is not the same data type that .NET Core added in C# 6.0. Okay? This is called a value tuple, and it is a value type. So that's characteristic number 1. in this case here, when I go ahead and assign path data, the underlying code is one that says declare a value tuple named path data. Okay? And the fields on path data are item 1, item 2, and item 3. If I go down to the IL level, it is item 1, item 2, and item 3, and there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is what it is. Now, when I am inside a non-public method, the compiler is looking at the data, is looking at the code and going, oh, you provided the name for me somewhere in the code, I'm going to use the name you provided. But if you don't provide a name, then you're going to get item 1, item 2, and item 3, and if you look at the IntelliSense, stink. Item 1, item 2, and item 3, which you can't see. I should just stop
Is there a
there.
way to index
Stop
them?
trying that out.
Find
What?
the
What's
string?
that?
Is there a way to index them by a variable?
No. Well, I don't think so. I haven't checked. No, I'm pretty sure there's not. And that would be a weird thing to do because data types could change, right? This is not an array, right? It's not even like an array. It is a data type with specific types for each of the items. So the thing you need to note is that if I do not provide a name, the name is item 1 and item 2 and item 3. And if you look at a value tuple with 3 type parameters, it is item 1, item 2, and item 3. Next, if you do provide names, okay, so here I'm verifying the type. I'm just showing you how that works. I'm still using string, and here I'm actually showing that it is indeed a value type. I'm going to test to prove it. Next, in this particular case, I am going ahead and assigning it a non-name type, and I'm given the names right here, and then I'm doing a .directory name, .file name, .extension. You guys have seen that before, but it's in line. Here I'm declaring another one, but in this case, I'm just assigning another variable, and I'm comparing those 2 types. Not very interesting either. This is the one I was looking for. Here's the one that's interesting. In this case, I've got directory name, file name, and extension, and then I've got directory name 2, file name 2, and extension, and I'm comparing those 2 things as being equal, and the test is passing.
How did it match that?
Hold on one second. The test is passing. Now remember, the underlying data type is system.valueTuple. I'm assigning the variable, I'm constructing it, I'm assigning those 2 things, and I'm comparing those 2 things. And is it going to be equal? Absolutely. Have we overridden the equality operator to go support check in each of the items? The answer is exactly, this is how you would expect to behave. That's the way it's behaving. Yes?
I thought you said earlier when you're checking if R equals, but make sure they are of the same type.
They are the same data type. And these are the same data type. Both of these are value tuples, as I showed right here.
In other words, they would serialize to be the same.
Yeah.
Even though you've given different property names, the property names aren't key.
Okay,
They
so
serialize.
yeah, let's just deal with I can't hold you in suspense for any longer. Clearly this is not working. I gotta just deal with it. Okay. So what we are saying is that the name persists not only in this code, but also in another library that's calling this code. If I'm going to call split path from a different assembly, I would want to be able to use the same name. I still want to get directory name and extension and file name. That's a logical thing that I would want to be able to do, and I could never do with anonymous types. So now the magical question that we are all asking is how? How does this work if the underlying type is a value tuple, and we're not going ahead and magically declaring a new type like we did with anonymous types? How does the name get persisted so that a caller of my split path method also gets directory name, file name, and extension? Any guesses? Reflection? No? Oh, what? Reflection, is that what we said? Reflection on what?
Item 1, item 2,
Isn't it
item 3,
metadata on
item
every
10.
signature?
Metadata is exactly right. We are generating properties. Sorry, we are generating attributes. So the C# compiler takes the tuple, the public tuple, and creates attributes on it which has the names. which now means when I go program from a different assembly and call a method that wants to go and use split path, I have access to the names as well. And of course, the IDE is doing some checking of the metadata to make sure this works. So the way that this, firstly, it just could be parsing the code if it's internal. But once you get external, it becomes public in the API, then it's going to be generating attributes that allow me to get access to that. Now what's really interesting about this is you can use a value tuple from C#6. If you use it from C#6, are you going to be able to use directory name and file name and extension? The answer is no. We didn't have a tuple syntax. But the data type is known. It's a value tuple. Can I go reference the NuGet package that has value tuple in it? The answer is absolutely. From C#6.0 you can do that. And then you're going to be able to do .item1, .item2, .item3, which means my fantastic class, path info, is now available for my C#6.0 code. All I've got to do is reference the NuGet package for system.valuetuple.
What would be more useful is the button that says turn this thing into legacy code that will run my customer's installation.
So the feature that you would like is to be able to say, hey, turn this off, I want to work this on my customer's collection.
Write it this way and convert it into something that my customer has.
So this is what I'm trying to say is your customer has this. The way your customer has it is they're going to use value tuple as the data type. And it is a simple data type that could have been written in C#1.0. I mean that literally. Like literally it could have been written in C#1.0, except we didn't have NuGet packages back then, but that's beside the point. You reference a NuGet package for a system.valuetuple, and then you will get a return type of system.valuetuple. You're going to do a dot operator on there, and you're going to see item 1, item 2, and item 3. It is absolutely accessible to customers who are still programming in legacy mode, as you call it.